All right, so welcome back everybody. For this video, I'm going to show you guys how to play Sfera. Now, this is a deck building co-op game. Yes, you heard me. It's deck building, but it's also co-op. Now, the theme of this game is basically there's about to be a mass extinction, and the only way to prevent this mass extinction is to basically restore the biomes, the 7 different biomes, to their natural beauty, their natural wonderment. And in order to do this, you're going to need key animals that would live in those biomes. And you're going to need key plants that would live in those environments to restore these biomes to their natural glory. So that's the theme of the game. Now, let me show you guys how to play it. So first of all, the objective of this game is we need to obtain all 7 of these biomes, these biome tiles, okay? And when we obtain them, they're going to go in a formation something like this. So let me just show you. So you're going to be basically building them out something like this, okay? But normally they're going to be in a pile, okay? But they're going to go and form around this tundra, okay? So that's what you're going to be doing. Now, how do you obtain these biome tiles, you're wondering? Well, you obtain these tiles by using animals. How do you get animals? Well, you get animals by using plants. How do you get plants? Well, you get plants by using the elements, okay? So that's how you're going to obtain them. We'll explain how to fully obtain them in a moment. But first, a losing condition. So while you need to get all 7 of these biome tiles placed out, okay, you also lose the game if all 7 of these extinction tiles get placed out. And they're going to get placed out basically the same way. So that way you know how close you are to losing, okay? We'll explain how you will obtain these extinction tiles later. But yes, this is the losing condition of the game. Okay, so let me teach you first the flow of the game, okay? Okay, so everybody is going to have a deck of cards. They're going to start with 2 of these disaster cards, and they're going to start with 1 card of each of the element types. This is earth, okay? This is air, this is time, this is water, and this is sun. You need all of these things in order to basically get plants, right? You need earth, you know, to put your seeds into, right? You need air to, allow them to grow, right? Sun, they're going to need sunlight to grow too, right? Water, obviously, to grow. And they will take time to grow, normally. So that's why these are the elements that you need in order to get plants, okay? So, on your turn, you're going to start by drawing 4 cards. Now, since this is a co-op game, other players that are playing with you, they're going to be drawing their cards out at the same time as you. So that way you can kind of collaborate and cooperate with each other to help each other out to win this game, okay? So, you can look at your friends' cards anytime you want, basically. The cards that they have out in their row, okay? So you're going to draw 4 cards for your row. So let's go ahead and place these first 4 cards, okay? Hold on. Okay, so I just needed a little bit of space. Okay, so right now I have earth, I have time, and I have air. On my turn, I'm going to need to use these cards to obtain some plants. So, is there any plants out that I can obtain? Well, this one requires earth, which I have. It also requires time, which I have. But it requires water and sun, which I don't have. I cannot obtain this card at all. Okay? All right. So what about this one? Well, this one requires 2 sun cards and a time card. But you're wondering, you only start the game with 1 sun card. How could you potentially have 2 sun cards? Well, here's the cool thing. So, for instance, I have time. And if I had my second sun card out, The only thing I would need is another sun card. And then what I could do is I could obtain a new sun card and utilize it to obtain this cactus. But I don't have a sun card out, so I couldn't obtain this card either. What else do we got here? Well, we have 2 suns on this, and we have an air. We don't have any sun, and we only have 1 air. So, can't obtain that card. Okay. This one requires 2 water and a sun. Once again, I can't obtain this one at all either. I cannot obtain a single plant here. So because I can't obtain any cards at all, guess what happens? My turn is done, because there's nothing I can do, and I'm going to draw a disaster card, which is bad. That was an awful first turn, okay? However, the thing is, if you were to ever draw, let's say I was to draw on my turn, on my next turn, or a future turn, I was to draw 3 cards that were disaster cards. For my turn would be immediately over because I have 3 disaster cards. And then what would happen is an extinction tile would be placed out. So that's the danger of, obtaining these disaster cards, especially early in the game. When you have only a small amount of cards, you increase the chances of drawing literally 3 of these disaster cards. Okay, so this is one of 2 ways that you'll obtain this extinction tile and you place it out. However, there is a worst case scenario. If, for instance, I ever drew 4 disaster cards for my turn is still over. But because I have only disaster cards, and you can only draw 4 cards for the start of your turn, instead of getting 1 extinction tile, I would have to place out 3 of these extinction tiles. Isn't that dangerous? So obtaining disaster cards, especially early in the game, is a bad idea, right? So, what could I have done if that was the case, though? So my turn had a disaster card in it, and I had this equation, okay? Earth, time, air, and this. What could I potentially have done? Well, there's a couple of things I could have done at that moment. Every player is going to start with these 3 tokens, okay? This is the plus action, okay, because it looks like a plus. Okay, plus action. This is the refresh action, the star thing. And forget exactly what movement, that's what it is. This is the movement action. This actually would not help me right now, so we won't explain it. But I could do something else with this. If I used the plus action, I could use it to draw a card. And so now, hey, I've gotten to draw a card, and now I've got water, air, time, and earth. And I could get this card, for instance, because the only thing I would need is a sun card. So I could do that. So let's say I do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to obtain this sun card. Let's just put it on top of that so everyone can see it in the camera. Okay. All right. And so then I use earth. So I push it up. Every card you're going to use, whether it's an element, a plant, or an animal, regardless of what you're doing, those 3 cards, you're going to push them up to indicate that you're using them. So we're using the earth, we're using the water, we're using the sun, and we're using the time to obtain this plant. And now because I've obtained something, I wouldn't get a disaster card, thankfully. That's something I could have done, okay? That's one thing I could have done. But doing that also means I can't use this token for a while. The only way to obtain these tokens, to use them again, to flip them over, is when you obtain one of these biome tiles. That's the only way. So use these tokens sparingly and only when absolutely necessary, okay? That was absolutely necessary for that first turn because there was literally nothing I could do. However, there is something else I could have done. So, for instance, instead of doing that action, I can do the refresh action instead. So let's say I didn't draw that card, and this is still my equation. I could refresh one of the market piles. So I could refresh, or should I say rows? I could refresh either the plant row or the animal row. But in this case, refreshing the animal row doesn't help me. But I could use this to refresh the plant row. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to use that token, and we will just put these underneath the pile of plant cards, and we'll draw 4 more cards. And let's see what we get. For instance. Okay, so let's see here. This one requires water, time, and earth. We can't obtain it unless we obtain this too. This one requires 2 air and a sun, which we can't obtain. This one requires water and air, which would just have the air. This one requires earth and sun, and so we can't really obtain that either. So the only one we can obtain now is going to be this one here. And so we will obtain one of these, then use that, and then use that, and then use that, not using this, to obtain this tree. So that's something else I could have done, for instance. Okay, so let's just say we do that, right? Cool. So now, because my turn is not necessarily done yet, immediately another card is drawn. So immediately, as soon as you take a plant, or as soon as you take an animal, you will refresh the market. Meaning you could potentially, possibly on your turn, obtain more than 1 plant, or potentially obtain more than 1 animal. That's possible. That is possible, okay? We'll get to what this icon means later, but there's something cool about this icon. We'll explain that later, okay? So let's say that's what we obtained, all right? And then immediately, before the next person goes, we draw our hand of 4 cards. And since I have 3 cards here, just like in a normal deck building game, you're going to shuffle your discard pile to form a new deck, to draw the card that you're going to need. Okay? Also, in this game, it's important to note that your discard pile should always be face down like this. So you're just going to have to memorize where your deck and discard pile are at all times, because you are not allowed to even see what the top card is of your discard pile. Okay? So this is our new deck now. We draw that 1 card, and we draw our 4 cards. Okay? And that's our 4 cards. Now, let's go to player 2's turn, for instance, because this is a co-op game. So he would already have his 4 cards out. Okay? So we'll go ahead and do that. And he hasn't used any of his tokens, so let's set that aside. Okay. All right. And he's got these elements and a disaster card. So is there anything here he could do on his turn? Let's see. This one requires air and water, which doesn't help unless he takes an air card. This one's got sun, water, and earth. So he would just need an earth card for that mushroom, for instance. This one requires 2 suns and an air, so that doesn't help. So actually, this is probably his best bet. He could take this card here using that water and then obtaining an air card and using that air card. Then that gets him in that plant card, for instance, okay? So that's how you're going to obtain plant cards. And like I said, you can obtain element cards to help you obtain the plant cards, but only 1. So you can't obtain 2 for the same plant. You can only obtain 1. Okay, so just so you know, make note of that again. Of course, you're going to refresh this every time, immediately. Okay. All right. So then, now that we've explained how you're going to obtain extinction tiles, how you're going to potentially gain some of these disaster cards, okay, and we'll get to let's actually explain how you can obtain some of these again. So these disaster cards, if you can't do anything on your turn, like I said earlier, you're going to obtain a disaster card if there's nothing you can obtain or no tile you can place out, okay? But there are other ways you can get this. So one of the ways is if you ever have 3 of the same element. So this is the danger of drawing too many of these elements to obtain plants. Yes, sometimes that's your only choice to avoid these, but getting too many of these can also be a problem Because if you ever, okay, let's say, for the point of argument, that my hand was something like this, okay? I drew my next 4 cards, and the next 4 cards I drew were something like this. 1 water, 1 sun, oh wait, and 2 more suns. At the beginning of your turn, if you ever have 3 of the same element, your turn is immediately over, and you must draw a disaster card. So that's the second way you can obtain disaster cards, is if, once again, you have too much of something. It's too hot. You have too many suns, it's too hot, you're going to get a disaster card because it's too hot. Or maybe it's raining too much and that causes a disaster. Maybe it got too windy and it caused a tornado, right? That's kind of the idea that they were going for with obtaining these disaster cards. So you'll obtain disaster cards, like I said, when there's nothing you can do on your turn, and when you have 3 of the same element out, then you'll obtain a disaster card. And then you'll obtain those extinction cards when you either have 3 disaster cards in play, or you have 4 out, 4 of these, then you get 3 extinction tiles. Okay, so we explained how you get those. Okay, so let's go ahead and put these back. Now, one thing to note is these are limited quantities of cards. So if you do take a certain amount of elements, like I take all of these sun cards out of the case, nothing bad's going to happen, at least here. You don't get a disaster card if that happens. You don't get an extinction tile if that happens. They're just gone from the game, which means it does mean it will limit, the time when you can get plants and things. It will limit that and increase the chances of you drawing more of these as these element cards start to disappear. And that does mean that you can play this game at any difficulty level. You can play the game where there's only 3 of each element here, or you can play the game where there's like 7 of each element instead. So that's the easiest mode. Having 3 suns out and 3 water and 3 time and 3 air and 3 earth is the hardest mode, for instance. So you can kind of ease yourself into this game, play the easy mode first, and then get harder, and then play it harder and harder and harder, until the point where you find a spot where that's your sweet spot. But basically, that's what will happen with those. Okay, so now the question is, how do we obtain the animals? That's kind of hard to explain because at the beginning of the game, you don't start with any plants. So let's just say, for the point of argument, that, for instance, we had... let's say I had this card, this mushroom here, and this moss card. I guess it's like moss. Okay, let's say those were 2 of the 4 cards we had, and let's just grab 2 more just because, And let's just say we gotta refresh this because that's how it would look like. Okay, so let's say this was our equation. Well, we certainly can't use this one element to obtain any of the plants. There's no plants that only have 2 elements needed anyway, not currently out. So what could we do? Well, we could use these plants to obtain an animal instead, if this was our equation. And so you'll notice that if you look at these 2 plants, this plant, this mushroom here, has this biome icon, which is, I forget, but this one is the temperate biome icon, and so is this one. So this means that we have 2 matching icons on these plants. We can obtain an animal that might be out that has either this icon or this icon, because both of these cards have this icon and this icon on it. So for instance, we could obtain this hawk here because it has that biome we need. Now you'll notice this hawk has the other 2 biomes which we don't have. We especially don't have this middle one, and this plant does have that, but none of them have this orange looking biome, right? But we don't need to have these biomes to obtain this animal. We just need 1 of these biomes on this card to obtain the animal. But we need to have 2 matching plants to obtain an animal, which means you will never use 3 plants to obtain an animal. You'll only use 2 plants to obtain an animal, okay? So that's something to note. And you can never use one plant to obtain an animal. You must use two matching of the same biome to get the animal, for instance, okay? That's the idea, okay? So then, that's how we obtain animals. So now you're probably wondering, how are we going to obtain those biome tiles? How do we obtain these? Well, let's say we had this hawk. Let's say this was our equation. And we also had this chameleon. All right? And let's grab two more animals because, hey, that's how it should look. Anyways, okay, so let's say this was our equation here. Well, you'll notice these two animals have the same icon. They have the same purple one, which matches Tropicus, the Tropicus biome, okay? So because we have both of these animals and they match this biome, we will then push them both up and obtain this, and then we get to place it into our, well, you know, play area, basically, away from that pile, basically. So now, hey, we got Tropicus. That's how you're going to obtain that biome tile. But however, here's the thing. You'll notice this chameleon only has one of the biomes on it. That means this chameleon will never be used again to obtain a biome tile because it only had one on it. That's the disadvantage to that equation. But you'll also notice that this animal and some of the plants have these icons on them as well. It has the plus icon and it has the refresh icon. When you have an animal in your row, okay, whether you have it at the beginning of your turn or you draw it with an ability, you can use its ability on your turn, on the same turn. So for instance, I could use this chameleon on the turn I have it to draw a card or to refresh the market. But I cannot use both of the abilities if it has more than one. I can only choose one to do. And then to remind yourself that you use the ability this turn, you'll just put this little leaf token onto the animal or plant that has the ability to indicate that you used it this turn, you know. And here's another thing. When you use a ability, whether it's an animal or it's, for instance, one of these plants here, which have similar abilities, right? Whenever you use a card for its ability, you can still use the animals to obtain the tiles, and you can still use the plants to obtain the animals, even if you use these icon abilities on the card. So that's cool. That's kind of a separate thing. So while you're limited to these tokens, and they're hard to renew, meaning because you can only renew them when you obtain one of these, and only the player that obtained this can renew one of these abilities. But these animals and plants also have abilities, some of them, so it increases your chances of getting to do these abilities more often because your plants and animals will also have them. Now, the only thing I haven't explained yet is the movement ability or action. So this is the only one I haven't explained as of yet. What this allows you to do is it will allow you to basically give one of your cards to a player of your choice. Because you're going to need to be keeping an eye on what your friends are doing, and there might become a time where your friends can't obtain anything on their turn, and you might just have the card to give to them that will allow them to obtain something, okay? But when you give a card away to a friend, if it was utilized to get something, like it's been pushed up, you cannot give a card to a player that you've already used, as in this, okay? You can give a card you used an ability for, but if you used this ability on the animal or plant, this ability, okay, and because this hawk, for instance, has it, if I used this ability with this hawk, I can't give this hawk to another player because I used its action on this card here. But I could give something else. I could give them this chameleon, for instance, something like that, for instance, okay? That's the general idea of the movement action, basically, okay? So you're not limited to the amount of actions you can do. You can do as many as you can possibly can on your turn before your turn is done. Also, you can never give your opponents disaster cards. So you'll never be able to get rid of these. Once you get them, you have them in your deck for the whole game. There's no way to get rid of them. There's no way to pass on this wildfire disasters to somebody else. So if one player has tons of these and another player has a couple of these only, there's no way you can give this to them to limit the amount of times that you're going to draw these. So just make note of that. You can't get rid of these. But basically, I think that's everything you need to know in order to play this game. I think that's everything you need to know. I think I covered everything that you need to know in order to play this game. So thank you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.